The silence in the massive dining room was broken only by the sound of James Wellington's rapid breathing. His hands shook as he pressed himself against the wall, watching the new chef arrange plates on the table 50 feet away. The woman hadn't even looked in his direction, but already his heart was racing like he'd run a marathon. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the familiar panic crept up his spine. "Sir, your dinner is ready," the chef called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. James couldn't move. The walls of his $10 million mansion felt like they were closing in around him. He was 28 years old, worth $3 billion, and he couldn't even sit at his own dining table when another person was in the room. The shame burned in his chest, but the fear was stronger. "I can't," he whispered to himself, the same words he'd said countless times before. This was his life. This was what success looked like when you were too broken to enjoy it. James Wellington, the tech genius who'd built an empire from his bedroom, couldn't handle being in the same room as his own employees. The media called him a reclusive visionary. His business partners thought he was eccentric. But the truth was much simpler and far more pathetic. He was terrified of human contact. The chef, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been with him for 3 months. That was longer than most lasted. Usually, they quit within weeks when they realized their boss was too strange to function normally. They'd leave meals outside his office door like he was some kind of dangerous animal. Some tried to be understanding. Others just thought he was rude and demanding. None of them knew the real reason he couldn't eat with them, couldn't shake their hands, couldn't even stand too close without feeling like his skin was on fire. "Mr. Wellington." "Mrs. Rodriguez called again, this time with concern in her voice. "Are you feeling all right?" The kindness in her tone made it worse. James squeezed his eyes shut and tried to breathe through the panic attack building in his chest. His therapist had taught him techniques, but they never worked when he was this far gone. The room spun around him as memories flooded back, memories he'd spent years trying to forget. He was 7 years old again, trapped in that small, dark space while adult hands reached for him. The feeling of being completely powerless, completely alone, completely unable to escape. The way his own body had betrayed him, freezing up when he needed to run. The shame that followed him into every interaction with another human being. "I need you to leave," James managed to say, his voice barely audible across the vast dining room. "Sir. Leave the food and go. Please." His voice cracked on the last word. He heard Mrs. Rodriguez sigh, followed by the clatter of dishes being rearranged. Then her footsteps on the marble floor, growing distant until the front door clicked shut. Only then could James breathe normally again. This wasn't living. This was existing in a prison of his own making, surrounded by luxury that meant nothing when you had no one to share it with. James slumped against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the cold floor. His empire was built on connecting people through technology, but he couldn't connect with anyone himself. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Patricia. She was one of the few people who knew about his condition, though she didn't know the details. She managed his life from her office downtown, handling everything that required human interaction. Mrs. Rodriguez quit. Left a resignation letter. "I'm interviewing replacements tomorrow." James stared at the message, feeling empty. Another person driven away by his inability to function like a normal human being. He typed back with trembling fingers, "No interviews. I'll eat delivery food." Patricia's response came immediately, "That's not healthy, James. You need proper meals. I've already found someone perfect for the job. She starts Monday." "I didn't approve this. You pay me to make decisions when you can't. This is one of those times. Her name is Simone Carter. She's professional, discreet, and comes highly recommended. Give her a chance." James wanted to argue, but he was too tired. Too defeated. He'd been fighting this battle for over 20 years, and he was losing ground. His condition was getting worse, not better. Soon he wouldn't be able to leave his bedroom, let alone run a company. Fine, he typed back. But when she quits like all the others, don't replace her. He pulled himself up from the floor and walked to the dining table where his untouched meal was getting cold. The loneliness hit him like a physical weight as he sat in the chair at the head of the long table, surrounded by 11 empty seats. This was his life. This was all it would ever be. James picked up his fork and took a bite of the perfectly prepared salmon. It tasted like nothing. Everything tasted like nothing when you ate it alone, day after day, year after year. He wondered what it would be like to share a meal with someone, to laugh over dinner, to feel normal for just one evening. But that was impossible. He was too damaged for that kind of life. Too broken for love or friendship or even basic human companionship. His wealth could buy him anything except the one thing he wanted most, the ability to be close to another person without falling apart. As he ate his solitary dinner in the echoing silence of his empty mansion, James Wellington made a decision. If this new chef quit like all the others, he wouldn't replace her. He'd stop pretending that things could get better and accept that this isolation was his permanent reality. He just had to survive until Monday, when Simone Carter would arrive and probably leave within a week. Then he could finally stop hoping for something that would never happen. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made normal people want to go for walks or meet friends for coffee. For James Wellington, it meant another day of hiding in his home office while a stranger invaded his space. He'd been awake since 5 a.m., pacing and checking the security cameras that showed every angle of his property. At exactly 9 o'clock, a modest blue sedan pulled through his gates. James watched from his office window as a woman stepped out, and his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, stunning, actually, with smooth dark skin and natural hair pulled back in a professional bun. She moved with confidence as she retrieved several bags from her car, completely unbothered by the intimidating size of his mansion. This was Simone Carter. Even through the security monitor, James could see the determination in her posture as she approached his front door. She was probably in her mid-20s, wearing chef's whites that looked crisp and new. Everything about her screamed competence and professionalism. The doorbell rang, and James's anxiety spiked. He'd given her the security code to enter, but apparently, she believed in proper introductions. His hands shook as he pressed the intercom button. "Ms. Carter." "Good morning, Mr. Wellington. I'm here to start work as your private chef. May I come in?" Her voice was warm and steady, with no hint of the nervousness that usually marked new employees. James found himself staring at her image on the security screen, mesmerized by her calm confidence. "The door is unlocked. I'm in my office upstairs. First door on the right. I won't be coming down." There was a pause. "All right. Should I prepare your breakfast now?" "Whatever you want. Just, don't come upstairs." "Understood." James watched her enter his home and disappear from the camera's view as she headed toward the kitchen. He tried to return to his work, but concentration was impossible. Every sound from downstairs drew his attention. The opening and closing of cabinet doors. Running water. The gentle clatter of pans and utensils. After an hour, delicious smells began drifting up the stairs. James realized he was actually hungry, which was unusual. Most mornings he barely managed to choke down a protein bar. But whatever Simone was cooking smelled incredible, rich and complex in a way that made his stomach growl. Another hour passed before he heard footsteps on the stairs. James's panic response kicked in immediately. His heart rate doubled as the footsteps stopped right outside his office door. "Mr. Wellington." Simone's voice came through the wood. "I've prepared your breakfast. Where would you like me to leave it?" James pressed himself against the far wall of his office, as far from the door as possible. Just put it on the floor and go back downstairs." "On the floor? Please." He heard a soft sound that might have been a sigh, then the gentle clink of dishes being set down. Her footsteps retreated, and only then could James breathe normally again. He waited another 10 minutes before cracking open the door. On the floor outside his office was a beautifully arranged breakfast tray. Fluffy scrambled eggs with herbs he couldn't identify, perfectly toasted bread, fresh fruit cut into elegant shapes, and coffee that smelled like it came from some exotic location. There was even a small vase with a single flower from his own garden. James carried the tray to his desk and took his first bite. The eggs were incredibly creamy and flavorful in a way that made him close his eyes in appreciation. This wasn't just cooking, this was art. For the first time in months, he cleaned his plate completely. When he was finished, James faced a dilemma. He needed to return the tray, but that meant leaving his office. He could hear Simone moving around in the kitchen below, and the thought of encountering her face to face made his palms sweat. He decided to wait her out. Surely she'd take a break or step outside eventually. But as the afternoon wore on, the sounds from the kitchen continued. She was apparently preparing lunch, and the smells drifting upstairs were making his mouth water again. By 2 o'clock, James was genuinely impressed. Most of his previous chefs barely lasted past noon on their first day. They'd serve him breakfast, realize he wasn't going to eat with them or even acknowledge their presence properly, and quit before lunch. But Simone seemed perfectly content to work alone. At exactly 1 p.m., her footsteps returned to the stairs. Again, she stopped outside his door. "Mr. Wellington. Lunch is ready." "Same arrangement?" "Yes," James managed to say. This time she'd prepared some kind of pasta dish with a sauce that smelled like heaven. The presentation was restaurant quality, and when James tasted it, he had to suppress a groan of pleasure. This woman could really cook. But it was the note tucked under his water glass that really got his attention. "Mr. Wellington, I hope you're enjoying the meals. I noticed you barely touched your breakfast yesterday, Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned it, so I'm trying to figure out your preferences. If there's anything you particularly like or dislike, please let me know. I'm here to make your life easier, not more complicated." Simone, James stared at the note for a long time. When was the last time someone had shown concern for his actual preferences? His previous chefs had mostly served generic healthy meals without much thought for what he might actually want to eat. But Simone was paying attention, trying to understand him. He found himself reaching for a pen. "Ms. Carter, the food is excellent. I don't have many preferences, but I do like spicy food and I'm allergic to shellfish. Thank you for the effort you're putting in. James Wellington." He left the note on the tray when he set it outside his door. When Simone came to collect it, he heard her pause to read it. Then, surprisingly, he heard a soft laugh. "Well," she said, apparently to herself, "at least he's polite." For the rest of the afternoon, James found himself listening for sounds from the kitchen instead of focusing on his work. There was something comforting about knowing someone else was in the house, even if he couldn't interact with them directly. It had been so long since his home felt alive. At 6 o'clock, Simone appeared at his door again with dinner. This time, the meal had a definite kick to it, some kind of spiced chicken with rice that made his eyes water in the best possible way. She'd taken his note seriously. When he finished eating, James found himself writing another note. "Perfect level of spice. How did you know exactly how much heat I could handle?" Her response came back with his collected dinner tray, "Lucky guess. Same time tomorrow." James smiled for the first time in weeks as he wrote back, "I'll be here." As he watched Simone's car disappear through his gates that evening, James realized something had changed. For the first time since Mrs. Rodriguez quit, he was actually looking forward to tomorrow. Not because his problems were solved, he was still too terrified to be in the same room with another person. But at least now he had something to anticipate besides another day of crushing loneliness. Maybe Simone Carter would last longer than a week after all. 3 weeks passed, and Simone Carter had not quit. This was unprecedented in James Wellington's carefully controlled world. Every morning at 9 a.m. sharp, her blue sedan appeared at his gates. Every evening at 6 p.m., she left behind the day's final meal and departed without drama or demands for face-to-face interaction. James found himself developing routines around her presence. He'd position himself by the office window when she arrived, watching her purposeful stride as she approached his front door. He'd listen for the sounds of her working in the kitchen, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, the sizzle of pans, the gentle humming she sometimes did while cooking. Their note exchanges had evolved into proper conversations. What started as simple meal preferences had grown into discussions about food, travel, and life philosophy. James discovered that Simone had trained at culinary school in Atlanta, worked in restaurants across the South, and dreamed of opening her own place someday. "Why private chef work instead of restaurant cooking?" he'd written one Tuesday. Her response came back with his lunch: "Restaurants are chaos. I like the intimacy of cooking for one person, learning their tastes, creating something personal. Besides, the pay is better and the hours don't kill your social life." James had stared at that note for a long time. Social life. What a foreign concept. He wrote back, "Do you miss the energy of restaurant kitchens?" "Sometimes. But there's something peaceful about this job. No angry customers, no impossible deadlines, no chef screaming at everyone. Just me, good ingredients, and someone who actually appreciates the food." That last line hit James harder than he expected. When was the last time someone had said he appreciated anything? His business associates respected his mind and his money, but appreciation was different. Appreciation was personal. "I do appreciate it," he wrote back. "More than you know." The next morning, Simone's response waited with his breakfast. "That means everything to a chef." "Thank you." As the days passed, James began sharing more about himself through their notes. He told her about his company, about the thrill of solving complex problems through code, about the satisfaction of building something that connected millions of people worldwide. He didn't mention that he'd built it all from isolation, but Simone seemed to understand anyway. "You must be incredibly disciplined to run a company from home," she wrote one day. "It's not discipline," James replied honestly. "It's necessity." He waited for her to ask what he meant, but she didn't push. Instead, her next note simply said, "We all do what we have to do to survive." That afternoon, James made a decision that terrified him. Instead of waiting for Simone to leave before collecting his lunch tray, he opened his office door while she was still climbing the stairs. He stayed hidden behind the door, but he could hear her breathing as she set down his meal. "Miss Carter," he said softly. She paused. "Yes, Mr. Wellington. Thank you. For staying. For understanding." There was a long silence. Then, "You don't have to thank me for doing my job. It's more than that, and we both know it." Another pause. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." When her footsteps retreated, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years: a genuine connection with another person. Not the superficial relationships he maintained through business emails and video conferences, but real understanding between two people who recognized something in each other. The next day, Simone's breakfast note contained more personal information than she'd ever shared. "I grew up in foster care after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Bounced between homes until I aged out at 18. Food was the one constant no matter where I was. I could cook something that made the place feel like home. That's why I do this work. I understand that everyone needs a safe space, and sometimes the kitchen is the heart of that space." James read the note 3 times, his chest tight with emotion. She understood isolation, understood what it meant to build walls for protection. That's why she hadn't pushed, hadn't demanded face-to-face meetings or normal employer-employee interactions. She recognized a fellow survivor. His response was the most honest thing he'd written to anyone in years: "I'm sorry about your parents. I understand loss and isolation more than you might think. You've given me something I didn't know I needed, proof that kindness still exists in the world. My safe space has always been empty before now. Simone's reply came back immediately, it doesn't have to stay empty. That afternoon, James did something that shocked him. When Simone came upstairs with his lunch, he spoke to her through the closed door. Would you mind if I asked you a question? Of course not. Are you happy? Doing this kind of work, I mean. Taking care of people who can't take care of themselves properly. He heard her shift her weight outside his door. I think everyone deserves to be taken care of, Mr. Wellington. And yes, it makes me happy to provide that when I can. Even when those people are difficult. You're not difficult. You're just careful. James pressed his forehead against the door, overwhelmed by the acceptance in her voice. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people haven't learned that being careful is sometimes the only way to survive. When Simone left that evening, James found himself wishing she could stay longer. Not in the same room, he wasn't ready for that, but just in the house. The silence felt heavier after weeks of having her presence fill the empty spaces. For the first time since childhood, James Wellington wasn't completely alone. He had someone who understood him, someone who cared about his well-being without demanding more than he could give. It wasn't traditional friendship, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. 6 weeks into their unusual arrangement, James Wellington made a decision that would have been impossible a month earlier. He was going to eat in the same room as Simone Carter. The idea terrified him, but it also excited him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Their note exchanges had become the highlight of his days, and he found himself craving more connection. Not physical, that was still unthinkable, but just the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with another person. He spent the entire morning working up the courage to suggest it. When Simone arrived at 9 a.m., James watched from his window as she unloaded groceries from her car. She moved with her usual confidence, but he'd begun to notice smaller details. The way she paused to appreciate the garden flowers. How she always checked that the door locked properly behind her. The care she took arranging everything in the kitchen before she began cooking. At noon, when she brought his lunch upstairs, James's hands shook as he wrote his note. Ms. Carter, would you be willing to try something different today? I'd like to eat lunch in the dining room while you're there. We don't have to sit together or talk if you prefer not to. I'd like to try. He slipped the note under his door before he could lose his nerve. Through the wood, he heard Simone pick it up and read it. The silence stretched so long that James began to panic. She was going to quit. This was too weird, too much to ask of anyone. Mr. Wellington. Simone's voice was gentle through the door. Are you sure you're ready for that? I don't know, James admitted honestly. But I'd like to try. If you're comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with whatever makes you feel safe. How would you like to do this? James's heart pounded as he considered the logistics. Maybe you could sit at the far end of the table. And I'll sit at this end. The table is 12 feet long, so there would be plenty of space between us. That sounds perfect. Should I set up lunch downstairs? Yes. Give me 10 minutes. James spent those 10 minutes in his private bathroom, splashing cold water on his face and practicing breathing exercises. His reflection looked pale and terrified, but also hopeful in a way that surprised him. When had he stopped looking completely defeated? The walk downstairs felt like crossing a minefield. Every step brought him closer to a person who would be sharing his space, breathing the same air, existing in his carefully controlled environment. But alongside the fear was something else: anticipation. Simone was already seated at the far end of the dining table when James entered the room. She'd positioned herself so she was facing slightly away from him, giving him the illusion of privacy even though they were sharing the space. Her posture was relaxed and non-threatening, like she was having lunch alone. Thank you, James managed to say as he took his seat at the opposite end of the table. "Thank you for trusting me," Simone replied without looking directly at him. For the first 5 minutes, James couldn't do anything but try to control his breathing. The panic attack he'd expected didn't come, but his whole body was tense with the effort of staying in the room. Simone seemed to understand, eating quietly and giving him space to adjust. Gradually, James became aware that the meal she'd prepared was incredible. Some kind of curry with complex spices that filled the room with amazing aromas. Despite his anxiety, his appetite responded to the food. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly. "My grandmother's recipe. She taught me that good food can make any situation more comfortable." Was she a chef too? Just a woman who knew how to take care of people. Simone's voice was warm with memory. She said that feeding someone was the most basic way to show love. James considered this as he took another bite. "I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me with love instead of just duty. Every meal I make for you has love in it, Mr. Wellington. Maybe not romantic love, but care. Respect. The hope that it might make your day a little brighter." The simple honesty of her words hit James like a physical force. He looked up and, for the first time in 6 weeks, made direct eye contact with Simone Carter. She was even more beautiful up close. Her dark eyes were intelligent and kind, and when she met his gaze, she smiled with genuine warmth. James felt his breath catch, not from panic this time, but from something else entirely. "You have a lovely smile," he said before he could stop himself. Simone's smile widened. "So do you, when you let it show." They finished their meal in comfortable quiet, occasionally exchanging glances that felt both terrifying and wonderful to James. When they were done, Simone stood to clear the dishes. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," James said immediately. "Yes, I'd like that very much." After Simone left that afternoon, James sat in his dining room for another hour, marveling at what had happened. He'd shared a meal with another person. He'd made eye contact. He'd even managed a few moments of normal conversation. It wasn't much by ordinary standards, but for James Wellington, it was a miracle. That night, he wrote Simone a longer note than usual. "Thank you for today. I know it probably seemed like a small thing to you, but it was huge for me. I haven't eaten with another person in over 10 years. You made it feel safe and natural, like maybe I'm not as broken as I thought." Her response came back the next morning with his breakfast. "You're not broken, James. You're just someone who learned to protect himself the only way he knew how. But maybe it's time to consider that not everyone is going to hurt you. Some people might even want to help you heal." As James read those words, he felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time in 20 years, he began to believe that healing might actually be possible. 2 months into their daily lunch meetings, James Wellington realized he was falling in love. The recognition hit him like a lightning bolt during one of their conversations about travel. Simone was describing a trip to New Orleans where she'd learned to make authentic jambalaya, her eyes bright with memory, and James felt his whole world shift. He was in love with a woman he'd never touched, never stood closer than 12 feet from, never even shared the same side of a room with. But the connection between them had grown stronger than any physical relationship he'd ever imagined. Their conversations had evolved far beyond polite exchanges. Simone told him about her dreams of opening a restaurant that would employ former foster kids, giving them the stability and family feeling she'd never had growing up. James shared his vision for expanding his company's reach into developing countries, using technology to bridge gaps between communities. "You have such a generous heart," Simone said one afternoon as they finished another extraordinary meal. "Most billionaires I read about seem focused on making more money. You actually want to help people." James felt heat rise in his cheeks. Money is just numbers on a screen after a certain point. Connection is what matters. Even if it's through technology rather than. He gestured vaguely between them. "Rather than what?" Simone's voice was gentle, encouraging. Rather than normal human interaction. The kind most people take for granted. There's nothing abnormal about what we have, James. It's just different. The way she said his name with warmth and familiarity made his heart race. Over the weeks, they'd gradually moved from formal titles to first names, and every time Simone said, James, it felt like a gift. Do you ever wonder, James said carefully, what it would be like if I were different? Normal. Simone was quiet for a long moment. I wonder what it would be like if the world were more understanding of people who are different. I don't think you need to change, James. I think other people need to expand their definition of connection. But don't you want? James struggled with the words. Don't you miss having someone who can actually be close to you? Someone who can touch you, hold your hand, be a real partner. The question hung in the air between them. James immediately regretted asking it, afraid he'd revealed too much of his own longing. I've had relationships like that, Simone said slowly. Men who could touch me whenever they wanted, who expected physical closeness as a given. But none of them saw me the way you do. None of them listened to me like you do. None of them made me feel as valued and understood as I feel when we sit at this table together. James's heart pounded so hard he was sure she could hear it across the room. Simone. I know this is complicated, she continued. I know what we have isn't traditional. But it's real, James. What I feel for you is real. The admission hung between them like a bridge that neither was quite ready to cross. James wanted to say so much that he loved her laugh, that he looked forward to her arrival every morning like Christmas, that she'd become the center of his entire world. But the words felt too big, too dangerous. Instead, he said, you've given me something I thought was impossible. What's that? Hope. Simone's smile was radiant. You've given me something too. What? A reason to believe that the right person is worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes or how unconventional the path. After she left that day, James found himself pacing his mansion like a caged animal. For the first time since their arrangement began, the house felt too small rather than too big. His feelings for Simone were growing beyond what their current situation could contain, but he had no idea how to bridge the gap between emotional intimacy and physical presence. That night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He called his therapist. Dr. Sarah? It's James Wellington. I know it's been a while, but I need to talk to someone. James, it's good to hear from you. What's going on? I think I'm in love, he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. And I have no idea what to do about it. There was a pause. That's wonderful news. Tell me about her. James found himself talking for over an hour, describing his relationship with Simone, their daily meetings, the way she'd slowly helped him feel less alone in the world. Dr. Sarah listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that helped him understand his own feelings. It sounds like she's been incredibly patient and understanding, Dr. Sarah said finally. Have you considered that she might be willing to continue being patient as you work toward more intimacy? I don't know if I can get there, James admitted. What if I try and fail? What if I ruin what we have? What if you succeed? What if you discover that healing is possible with the right person? That question haunted James for the rest of the night. As he lay in his enormous, empty bed, he realized that Simone had already proven healing was possible. She'd helped him eat in the same room with another person, make eye contact, carry on conversations. 6 months ago, even those simple acts would have been unthinkable. Maybe Dr. Sarah was right. Maybe love really could overcome even the deepest fears. The next morning, James made a decision. He was going to tell Simone how he felt. He was going to risk everything for the chance at something real. The storm arrived without warning on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. James was finishing lunch with Simone when the first crack of thunder made him jump so violently he knocked over his water glass. It's all right, Simone said quickly, rising to get a towel. Just a thunderstorm. But James was already spiraling. The sound of the thunder mixed with the darkness outside triggered something deep and primal in his memory. Suddenly he wasn't a 28-year-old billionaire sitting in his own dining room, he was 7 years old again, trapped and helpless while a storm raged outside. "I have to go," James gasped, pushing back from the table so quickly his chair toppled over. "I have to get upstairs." James, wait, but he was already running, taking the stairs two at a time as lightning illuminated the windows and thunder shook the house. Behind him, he could hear Simone calling his name, but her voice sounded distant and distorted through the panic consuming his mind. James burst into his office and slammed the door, pressing his back against it as his breathing became shallow and rapid. His vision tunneled, and cold sweat broke out across his forehead. The familiar sensation of drowning in his own fear crashed over him in waves. This was a bad one. Worse than he'd had in months. The combination of the storm and his emotional vulnerability after weeks of growing closer to Simone had created a perfect storm of anxiety. His carefully constructed safe space felt like it was crumbling around him. "James." Simone's voice came through the door, gentle but concerned. "Are you okay?" He couldn't answer. He was curled up on the floor now, arms wrapped around his knees, fighting to breathe through the panic that felt like it was crushing his chest. "I'm not going anywhere," Simone said. "I'm going to sit right here outside your door until you're ready to talk. Take your time." Through his panic, James heard the soft sound of Simone settling on the floor in the hallway. The knowledge that she was there, not leaving, not judging, just present, began to cut through the chaos in his mind. "Can you hear me, James?" Simone's voice was calm and steady. "I want you to try something with me. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, then out for 4. Can you try that?" James tried to follow her instructions, but his breathing was too erratic. "That's okay," Simone said. "Let's try something else. I'm going to tell you about the first meal I ever cooked by myself. You just listen to my voice and breathe however feels natural." As Simone began describing her 8-year-old self attempting to make pancakes and nearly burning down her foster family's kitchen, James felt his breathing slowly start to regulate. Her voice was like an anchor, something solid to hold onto while the panic gradually loosened its grip. "The pancakes were terrible," Simone continued with a soft laugh. "Burnt on the outside, raw in the middle. But Mrs. Johnson, that was my foster mom at the time, she ate every bite and told me I had real potential. It was the first time anyone had encouraged me to keep trying instead of giving up." "Why are you telling me this?" James managed to whisper. "Because sometimes we all need reminding that our worst moments don't define us. That person who cares about us sees our potential, not just our struggles." James pressed his forehead against the door, feeling closer to Simone than ever despite the physical barrier between them. "I'm so messed up, Simone. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Everyone has something they're dealing with. Yours just happens to involve panic attacks and difficulty with physical proximity. That doesn't make you less worthy of care and understanding. Most women wouldn't put up with a man who can't even be in the same room during a storm. Most women haven't learned what I've learned about patience and different kinds of strength. You run a billion-dollar company, James. You employ thousands of people. You create technology that helps others connect. That takes incredible strength, even if it looks different from what people expect." James felt tears burning his eyes. "I wanted to tell you something today. Before the storm hit. You can tell me now if you want. Or we can wait until you're feeling stronger." "I love you," James said, his voice barely audible through the door. "I know that's crazy considering we've never even touched, but I love you, Simone. You're the best part of every day. You're the reason I look forward to waking up. I love you too," Simone said softly, cutting off his desperate words. "I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart. I love how you remember every detail I tell you about my life. I love that you see me as more than just someone who cooks for you. I love you exactly as you are, James. The simple acceptance in her words broke something open in James's chest. For the first time in 20 years, he felt completely seen and completely loved by another person. I wish I could hold your hand right now, he whispered. Someday, Simone said. When you're ready. I'm not going anywhere. They sat in silence for a while, separated by a door but connected by something deeper than physical touch. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the house, James felt calmer than he had in years. Simone. Yes. Thank you for staying. For not running away when you saw how broken I am. You're not broken, James. You're healing. And healing takes time. When the storm finally passed an hour later, James opened his office door to find Simone exactly where she'd promised she'd be, sitting on the floor in the hallway, her back against the wall, patient and present. They looked at each other for a long moment, and for the first time since he was a child, James wished he could reach out and touch another person. Not from obligation or social expectation, but from pure love and gratitude. Maybe someday, he said, echoing her earlier words. Simone smiled. Maybe someday. In the weeks following James's panic attack and their mutual declaration of love, everything between them shifted into something deeper and more intimate. Their daily lunches became the foundation of a relationship unlike anything either had experienced before. James found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, not even his therapist. He told Simone about the recurring nightmares that had plagued him since childhood, about the way success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with, about the profound loneliness that had shaped every decision he'd made for the past 20 years. Simone listened without judgment, offering comfort through her presence and understanding. She shared her own struggles too: the difficulty of aging out of foster care with no family support, the restaurant jobs where male chefs had made her feel unsafe, the relationships that had failed because she'd never learned to trust completely. I understand why you need distance, she told him one afternoon as they finished another incredible meal. I've needed it too, just for different reasons. Maybe that's why this works between us. We both know how to respect boundaries. Their physical distance began to shrink gradually, almost imperceptibly. James started sitting closer to the middle of the long dining table. Simone adjusted her position accordingly, maintaining the space he needed while closing the gap between them inch by inch. One day in November, James surprised himself by asking, "Would you like to watch a movie after lunch? Together?" Simone's eyes lit up with delight. In the living room. You could sit on the couch, and I could. Maybe sit in the chair across from it. I'd love that. They settled into James's enormous living room, with about 8 feet of space between them. James had chosen a comedy, something light and safe that wouldn't trigger any difficult emotions. But he found himself barely paying attention to the screen. Instead, he kept stealing glances at Simone, marveling at the way she laughed, the expressions that crossed her face, the simple pleasure of sharing an experience with her. "This is nice," Simone said during a quiet moment in the film. "It is," James agreed. "I can't remember the last time I watched a movie with someone else. We should make it a regular thing. I could stay a little later some days if you'd like." The offer made James's heart soar. "I'd like that very much." Their movie afternoons became another cherished routine. James found himself looking forward to those quiet hours together almost as much as their lunch conversations. Sometimes they discussed the films afterward, analyzing characters and themes with the intensity they brought to everything else. Sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence, basking in each other's company. One afternoon in early December, as they watched a romantic drama, James found himself studying Simone's profile in the glow of the television. She was incredibly beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something about the way she moved through the world that drew him like a magnet: her confidence, her kindness, her ability to find joy in simple moments. "Simone," he said during a quiet scene. She turned to look at him. Do you ever think about what it would be like if I could touch you? She finished gently. James nodded, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. I think about it all the time. I wonder what it would feel like to hold your hand. To hug you. He trailed off, embarrassed by his own longing. I think about it too, Simone admitted. But I also love what we have right now. This connection we've built, this understanding between us, it's precious, James. Whether or not we ever become physically intimate, what we have is real and valuable. But you must want more. You must want someone who can give you everything a normal relationship offers. Simone was quiet for a moment, considering her words. I've had normal relationships, James. Men who could touch me whenever they wanted but never really saw me. Men who were physically present but emotionally distant. What we have is the opposite of that. You see me completely. You value my thoughts, my dreams, my daily experiences. You've never once made me feel like I exist just to serve your needs. Because you don't, James said fiercely. You're brilliant and talented and kind. You deserve to be cherished for who you are, not what you can provide. The intensity in his voice made Simone smile. That's exactly what I mean. You love me for me, not for what I can give you physically. That's rarer than you might think. But surely you have needs. My needs are being met, Simone interrupted softly. Maybe not all of them, maybe not in traditional ways, but the most important ones. The need to be understood, appreciated, valued, loved. You meet those every single day. James felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with deep, abiding love. I never thought it was possible to feel this close to someone without touching them. Touch is just one way to connect. We've found others. That night, after Simone left, James sat in his living room for hours, thinking about their conversation. She was right, they had found other ways to connect. Through words, through shared meals, through the simple act of being present with each other. It wasn't traditional, but it was profound. For the first time since falling in love with her, James began to believe that maybe what they had was enough. Maybe it was even better than what most people settled for. Maybe love really could transcend physical limitations. The call came on a Monday morning in January, shattering the peaceful routine James and Simone had built together. James was in his office, preparing for Simone's arrival, when his phone rang with an emergency that would test everything they'd built together. James, we have a serious problem. Patricia's voice was tight with stress. Blackstone Industries is making a hostile takeover bid for the company. They're claiming you're an unfit leader due to your personal situation. James's blood ran cold. What personal situation? They know about your social anxiety, James. They're saying a CEO who can't attend board meetings or public events is a liability. They've got lawyers, they've got backing, and they're moving fast. The world seemed to tilt around James as the implications hit him. His company, the thing he'd built from nothing, the digital empire that employed thousands of people, was under attack. And the weapon being used against him was his own mental health. How do they know? James asked, though he already suspected the answer. Someone talked. Maybe a former employee, maybe someone from your medical team. Does it matter? The point is, they're using it against you, and the board is spooked. James sank into his desk chair, feeling the familiar onset of panic. But this time, it wasn't just about his own well-being. Thousands of jobs were at stake. The innovative projects his company funded, the charitable initiatives they supported, the technological advances they were pioneering, all of it could disappear if Blackstone succeeded. What do I need to do? He asked, though the answer terrified him. You need to be visible. Public appearances, board meetings, media interviews. You need to prove you're capable of leading the company in person, not just from behind a computer screen. The doorbell rang downstairs, Simone arriving for another day of their carefully orchestrated routine. James felt torn between two worlds, the safe, intimate bubble he'd created with her, and the harsh reality of business that demanded he step outside his comfort zone. "I need time to think," James told Patricia. "We don't have time. The board meeting is Thursday. If you don't show up in person, they'll vote to accept Blackstone's offer." After hanging up, James sat in his office, paralyzed by the impossible choice before him. He could fight for his company and risk everything he'd built with Simone, or he could protect his mental health and watch his life's work be destroyed. 20 minutes later, Simone's voice came through his door. "James. I've got your breakfast ready, but you sound upset. What's wrong?" For the first time in months, James opened his office door while Simone was still in the hallway. The need for her support outweighed his anxiety about proximity. "There's a crisis," he said, looking into her concerned eyes. "Someone is trying to take my company away, and the only way to stop them is to do things I'm not sure I'm capable of." Simone listened intently as James explained the situation. Her expression grew more determined with each detail. "They're using your mental health against you," she said, anger flashing in her eyes. "That's not just wrong, it's probably illegal." "Legal or not, it's effective. The board is scared that I can't represent the company publicly." "Can you represent the company publicly, I mean?" The question hung between them. James wanted to say no, to retreat into the safety of his routines and let the world take what it wanted from him. But looking at Simone, at this incredible woman who'd shown him what it meant to be seen and valued, he felt something shift inside him. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But maybe it's time to find out." Simone stepped closer, still maintaining the distance he needed but radiating support. "What would you need to make it possible?" "I'd need." James paused, the idea forming as he spoke. "I'd need someone I trust with me. Someone who understands my limitations but believes in my capabilities." "I believe in your capabilities," Simone said without hesitation. "You've built something incredible, James. You employ thousands of people, you've created technology that brings families together across continents, you've donated millions to causes that matter. That takes real leadership, even if it doesn't look traditional. Will you come with me?" The words tumbled out before James could second-guess them. "To the board meeting, I mean." "I know it's not part of your job, but yes," Simone said immediately. "Of course I'll come with you." The relief James felt was overwhelming. "I can't promise I won't have a panic attack. I can't promise I'll be able to function normally around all those people." "You don't have to be normal. You just have to be yourself. The man who built this company, who cares about his employees, who's worth fighting for." That afternoon, they began planning James's return to the public eye. Simone researched breathing techniques and grounding exercises that might help during the meeting. James worked with Patricia to prepare his presentation, focusing on the company's achievements and future vision rather than defending his personal choices. "What if I freeze up?" James asked during one of their planning sessions. "Then I'll be there to remind you who you are and what you've accomplished," Simone said simply. "What if it's not enough? What if they take the company anyway? Then we'll figure out what comes next. But we won't give up without a fight." As Thursday approached, James found himself calmer than he'd expected. The prospect of facing a boardroom full of people still terrified him, but having Simone's support made it feel possible in a way it never had before. He was about to put everything on the line: his company, his reputation, his carefully constructed safe space. But for the first time in his adult life, James Wellington wasn't facing the challenge alone. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, matching James's internal weather as he prepared for the most important meeting of his professional life. He stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 5th time, hands trembling with nervous energy. Simone had arrived early that morning, bringing coffee and a light breakfast he probably wouldn't be able to eat. She'd also brought something else: a quiet confidence that somehow transferred to him just by being in her presence. "You look very professional," she said when he came downstairs, wearing his best navy suit and the lucky tie Patricia had sent over. I look terrified, James corrected. That too. But also determined. Ready to fight for what's yours. The drive to downtown took 45 minutes, with Simone behind the wheel of James's rarely used Mercedes. He'd thought about hiring a car service, but the idea of being trapped in a vehicle with a stranger was too overwhelming on top of everything else. As they navigated through city traffic, James found himself studying Simone's profile. She'd dressed professionally too, a sleek black dress with a matching blazer that made her look like she belonged in any boardroom. Her presence was going to raise questions, but James didn't care. He needed her there more than he needed to maintain appearances. Tell me about the board members, Simone said as they pulled into the parking garage. Help me understand who we're dealing with. James ran through the list. Margaret Chen, the founding investor who'd believed in him from the beginning, Robert Torres, the former tech executive who understood the industry, Sarah Kim, the brilliant strategist who'd helped guide the company's expansion. Mixed in were newer members, people who'd joined as the company grew but didn't have the same personal investment in James's success. Margaret will support me, James said. Robert probably will too, if I can show him I'm still the same person who built this company. The others? He shrugged. They'll vote for whoever they think can make them the most money. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt endless. James practiced his breathing exercises while Simone stood quietly beside him, her presence more calming than any medication could have been. Remember, she said as they approached the boardroom doors, you belong here. This is your company, built with your vision and your hard work. Don't let anyone make you forget that. The boardroom was exactly as intimidating as James had expected. 12 people in expensive suits sat around a polished conference table, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. At the far end sat Richard Blackstone himself, looking smugly confident about the outcome. James felt his breathing quicken as all eyes turned to him. The familiar panic began to build in his chest, but then he felt Simone's presence behind him, not touching, but close enough that he could sense her support. Good morning, James said, proud that his voice came out steady. Thank you all for being here. He took his seat at the head of the table, with Simone positioned in a chair along the wall where he could see her. She gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. Before we begin, Richard Blackstone interrupted, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Mr. Wellington's unique management style has created significant concerns about the company's future leadership. My management style has created a $3 billion company, James replied, feeling strength flow through him at Simone's encouraging smile. Perhaps we should focus on results rather than style. For the next hour, James presented his vision for the company's future. He talked about new technologies in development, expansion plans for emerging markets, and innovative partnerships that could triple their revenue within 5 years. He spoke passionately about the company culture he'd built, where employees felt valued and supported regardless of their personal challenges. This all sounds impressive on paper, Richard said dismissively, but how can shareholders trust a CEO who can't even attend public events? How do we know you won't disappear again when the pressure gets intense? This was the moment James had been dreading. The room fell silent as everyone waited for his response. He could feel the panic starting to build, the familiar urge to run and hide from the scrutiny. Then he looked at Simone. She wasn't looking at him with pity or concern. She was looking at him with pride, with the absolute confidence that he could handle this moment. You want to know about pressure? James said, his voice growing stronger. I built this company while dealing with severe social anxiety. I made every major decision while fighting panic attacks that could floor most people. I created something extraordinary not despite my challenges, but alongside them. He stood up, feeling more confident than he had in years. Mental health doesn't disqualify someone from leadership. It teaches empathy, resilience, and creative problem solving. Those aren't weaknesses, they're exactly what this industry needs. Margaret Chen leaned forward. What's changed, James. You haven't attended a board meeting in 3 years. Why now? James looked directly at Simone before answering. I've learned that having the right support system makes anything possible. I've learned that isolation was a choice, not a necessity. And I've learned that some things are worth fighting for, even when that fight scares you. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as board members absorbed his words. James could see some of them reconsidering, but others still looked skeptical. Mr. Wellington, Robert Torres said carefully, can you commit to more regular in-person appearances? Board meetings, investor presentations, key public events. James felt his throat tighten. This was the question that would determine everything. He could lie, promise things he wasn't sure he could deliver. Or he could be honest and risk losing everything. I can commit to trying, he said finally. With the right support and understanding, I believe I can fulfill those obligations. But I won't pretend it will be easy, and I won't promise to do things exactly the way other CEOs do them. The vote was closer than James had hoped but decisive enough to matter. 8 votes to keep him as CEO, 4 to accept Blackstone's offer. As the meeting ended and people filed out, Margaret Chen approached him. That was brave, James. And overdue. But you can't disappear again. The board meant what they said about regular appearances. I understand, James replied, though the commitment terrified him. As they walked back to the parking garage, Simone was quiet, letting James process what had just happened. Only when they were safely in the car did she speak. I'm so proud of you, she said simply. You were incredible in there. I couldn't have done it without you, James replied honestly. Having you there made all the difference. You had the strength all along. I just helped you remember it. As they drove home, James realized that something fundamental had shifted. He'd faced his worst fear, public scrutiny and judgment, and survived. More than survived, he'd triumphed. But the real test was just beginning. He'd made promises he wasn't sure he could keep, and the whole world would be watching to see if he could deliver. 3 months after the board meeting, James Wellington was learning that keeping promises to face the public was both harder and easier than he'd expected. With Simone's support, he'd attended investor presentations, company meetings, and even a few media interviews. Each appearance was still challenging, but they were becoming possible in a way that had once seemed impossible. The real test came on a warm April morning when Patricia called with news that made James's blood run cold. Richard Blackstone is making another move, she said without preamble. He's called a press conference for this afternoon. Word is, he's going to release private medical information about you. Trying to paint you as unstable and unfit to lead. James felt the familiar panic begin to build, but alongside it was something new: anger. He can't do that. That's illegal. Legal or not, once it's out there, the damage is done. You need to get ahead of this, James. Hold your own press conference. Control the narrative. The idea of facing a room full of reporters made James's hands shake, but he found himself nodding. Set it up for this evening. Give me time to prepare. When Simone arrived that afternoon, she immediately sensed the crisis. James explained the situation while pacing his living room, unable to sit still. He's going to destroy everything, James said. 20 years of building this company, and he's going to tear it down with my own medical history. Not if we don't let him, Simone said firmly. You've been telling your story on your own terms for months now. This is just a bigger stage. A room full of reporters isn't the same as a boardroom. These people will tear me apart. Simone stood up, moving closer to James than she'd ever dared before. They were only 3 feet apart now, close enough that he could see the determination blazing in her eyes. James Wellington, she said, her voice strong and clear, you are one of the most brilliant, compassionate, successful people I've ever known. You've built something that employs thousands of people and makes the world a better place. Don't let one cruel man's jealousy make you forget who you are. Something about her proximity, her fierce defense of him, made James's heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with anxiety. He found himself taking a step closer to her. What if I can't do it? What if I fall apart up there? Then I'll be right there to help you put yourself back together. But you won't fall apart, because you're stronger than you know. They stood there for a moment, closer than they'd ever been, the air between them charged with emotion. James felt something shift, not just his anxiety, but his entire understanding of what was possible between them. The press conference was scheduled for 6 p.m. at a downtown hotel. As James and Simone arrived, they could see the crowd of reporters and cameras gathered in the conference room. James's hands were shaking as they walked through the lobby. "I can't do this," he whispered to Simone. "There are too many people. Too many cameras." "Look at me," Simone said, stopping in the hallway outside the conference room. "Just look at me and remember why you're doing this." James met eyes, finding strength in her unwavering support. "For the company. For the employees. For yourself," Simone corrected. "Because you deserve to live without shame, without hiding, without letting other people define your worth." As they were about to enter the room, Richard Blackstone appeared with his own entourage. He looked surprised to see James there, clearly having expected him to hide from the confrontation. "Wellington," Blackstone said with a smirk. "Didn't expect to see you here. Though I suppose you brought your handler." His dismissive glance at Simone made James see red. "Don't," James said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare talk about her like that. Touchy about your chef, aren't you? Makes a man wonder what kind of services she really provides." The insinuation hit James like a physical blow, but not because it hurt him, because it insulted Simone. In that moment, something inside him snapped. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the careful distance he'd maintained melted away in the face of pure protective fury. "Simone Carter is the most incredible woman I've ever known," James said, his voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "She's brilliant, talented, kind, and strong. She's stood by me when others would have run. She's believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And I love her." Before he fully realized what he was doing, James reached out and took Simone's hand. Her fingers were warm and soft, and the touch sent electricity through his entire body. But instead of panic, he felt only rightness, like this was what he'd been missing his entire life. Simone's eyes widened in shock, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently, anchoring him in the moment. "She's also the woman I'm going to marry," James continued, the word surprising him as much as everyone else. "If she'll have me." The hallway fell silent except for the click of camera shutters from reporters who'd spilled out of the conference room. James realized his impromptu declaration was being broadcast live, but he found he didn't care. Let the whole world know how he felt about Simone Carter. "James," Simone whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied, lifting their joined hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple contact felt like a miracle. Richard Blackstone looked furious at having his moment stolen. "This is just a publicity stunt." "No," James said, turning to face the reporters who were now crowding around them. "This is me telling the truth. About my mental health, about my company, and about the woman who saved my life." The impromptu press conference that followed was unlike anything James had ever imagined. Standing hand in hand with Simone, he answered questions about his anxiety disorder, his management style, and his vision for the company's future. Instead of being defensive, he was open and honest about his challenges while emphasizing his achievements. "Mental health issues don't disqualify someone from leadership," he told the assembled reporters. "They teach empathy, resilience, and creative problem solving. My company has thrived because I understand what it means to feel isolated and work to ensure none of my employees ever feel that way." When someone asked about his relationship with Simone, James's answer was simple and direct: "She taught me that love comes in many forms, and the most important form is unconditional acceptance. She saw who I really was and chose to stay. Later that evening, back at James's mansion, they sat together on the living room couch, actually together, with James's arm around Simone's shoulders and her head resting against his chest. The physical contact still made his heart race, but it was a good kind of racing now. "I can't believe you proposed to me on live television," Simone said with a laugh. "I can't believe you haven't given me an answer yet," James replied. Simone lifted her head to look at him. "Yes, you impossible, wonderful man. Of course I'll marry you." Their first kiss was tentative and sweet, both of them marveling at the simple miracle of being able to touch each other. James felt tears on his cheeks, tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude for the journey that had led them to this moment. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back. 6 months later, James and Simone were married in a small ceremony in the garden of their home. James had insisted on keeping it intimate, just close friends, Patricia, Dr. Sarah, and a few key board members who had become genuine supporters. Margaret Chin officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. "I've watched James build an empire," she said during the ceremony, "but I've never seen him as happy as he is with Simone. That's the real measure of success." James's vows were simple but heartfelt. "Simone, you taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being seen completely and accepted completely. You saw my broken pieces and helped me understand they were part of something beautiful. I promise to spend the rest of my life loving you with the same patience and understanding you've shown me." Simone's response brought tears to everyone's eyes. "James, you showed me that real strength sometimes looks like vulnerability. That leadership sometimes means admitting you need help. That love sometimes means waiting for the right moment and the right person. I promise to stand by you through every challenge, celebrate every triumph, and remind you every day how extraordinary you are." When they kissed as husband and wife, James felt the last walls around his heart crumble completely. He was still the same person who struggled with anxiety and social situations, but he was no longer alone with those struggles. Their honeymoon was spent at home, cooking elaborate meals together and planning their future. Simone had decided to close her private chef business and partner with James on a new venture, a foundation that would provide mental health resources and support for entrepreneurs and business leaders. "We can help other people who are struggling in silence," Simone said as they worked on the foundation's mission statement. "Show them that success and mental health challenges aren't mutually exclusive." "You mean show them what you showed me," James said, pulling her into his arms. "That everyone deserves love and support, regardless of how different they might be." 2 years later, James Wellington was a changed man, not because his anxiety had disappeared, but because he'd learned to manage it with the support of people who loved him. He still found large crowds challenging, but he no longer let that stop him from living fully. The company had grown beyond his wildest dreams, with innovative programs for employee mental health that had become the industry standard. The foundation he and Simone had started was helping hundreds of people find their own paths to healing and success. But the greatest change was in James himself. He'd learned that love really could overcome fear, that vulnerability was a form of strength, and that the right person would always be worth the risk of letting them close. As he sat in their kitchen one Sunday morning, watching Simone prepare breakfast while humming softly to herself, James reflected on the journey that had brought them together. He'd spent so many years believing he was too broken for love, too damaged for happiness. He'd been wrong about so many things. But he'd been absolutely right about one thing: Simone Carter was extraordinary. And somehow, miraculously, she was his. "What are you thinking about?" Simone asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "Just how grateful I am," James replied, standing to wrap his arms around her from behind. "For you, for us, for everything we've built together. Even the chaos. The press conferences and board meetings and all the scary public stuff. Especially that," James said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because it led us here. To this life, this love, this happiness I never thought was possible." Simone turned in his arms, her smile radiant with joy. "I love you, James Wellington." "I love you too, Simone Wellington," he replied, still marveling at the sound of her married name. Their kiss was interrupted by the timer on the oven, but neither of them minded. They had the rest of their lives for kisses, for conversation, for the simple pleasure of being together. James Wellington had found his happy ending, not in spite of his struggles, but because of them. Because they'd led him to the one person who could see past his fears, to the man he really was underneath. And that man was worthy of love after all.